Your body is a team player with you. And when I say that to leaders, there's a pause. There's like, that ache that I've been having, that pain that I've been having, I didn't think of as the body being a team player with me, but it is. And you can get to optimal performance, mind, body, and spirit, when you work on all these different aspects.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. I'm known as the speech coach for executives because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching and group training for your team. My guest today is Mara Benner. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Mara. 1, she has spent over 25 years in corporate and nonprofit leadership roles, including working for the CEO of a $2 billion healthcare company. She knows the corporate world. 2, she is a practitioner and runs the corporate wellness program for the GW Center for Integrative Medicine. She knows wellness, something we all need to get acquainted with. 3, and she has personally loved learning how various cultures combined health, wellness, and the mind in the body-spirit connection. One of those adventures took her to China, where she was honored to learn with Qigong masters, and I tripped over that word. This is her unique approach to helping leaders thrive. Mara Benner, my Chinese isn't so good today. In any case, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Hi, George. Good morning. And I am so excited to be with you. And I'm so excited to be part of Your Intended Message podcast. So thank you so much for having me today.
Delighted to be talking with you. First of all, for those who might not be so familiar with, and including myself, tell us, what is Qigong?
Yeah. Qigong is a form of connecting the mind, body, and spirit. It's actually similar to yoga, which most people are familiar with. It's a physical movement, but you're also using the mind in imagery to also help and support the connections of the mind, body, spirit. So Qigong, the other one that you may be familiar with, is something called Tai Chi, which is a form of Qigong. And it was just amazing to have the opportunity to go to China and learn from these wisdom leaders who have been practicing the techniques and the components of listening to the mind, body, and spirit, and being able to pass some of that wisdom on as well. And I have to say that, over just on a personal journey over my lifetime, I have so enjoyed doing kind of a deep dive into how various cultures worked with the mind, body, spirit. Each has had very different approaches, but, you may know it as yoga from India, Qigong, Tai Chi, acupuncture from China. Here in the US, there's been kind of this shamanic approach that Native Americans have had. There's herbs that are used. There's all different ways of helping connect the mind, body, and spirit. And I think more and more people, and especially leaders, are recognizing the importance of being able to incorporate these techniques for better leadership skills overall, for that emotional intelligence or self-awareness aspect, for self-regulation in how they're being a great leader, and then really to be able to begin to incorporate those techniques with their teams for success. And I'll say one other thing that I think is fascinating about this is those leaders who have done an amazing job of working on the mind, body, and spirit also tap into the ability to create at a whole new level for innovation and for new approaches. And with time speeding up on how quickly companies have to move and engage in new innovative approaches for products or services, that ability as a leader to tap into that creative aspect for the vision of the company and the organization is more important than ever. So a lot of stuff there to unpack, I suppose, but, but great information.
Mara, as leaders, we often think that the most important purpose is directing other people, is directing our teams, attracting our customers, making, and it's the communication with other people. However, I suppose what we might forget is we can't direct others effectively if we're not directing ourselves or not in touch with our own body, mind, and spirit. Because if the core is rotten, the output isn't going to be productive. And I'm guessing, so that's where you start. So you help, because we need to be in touch with ourselves, and yet we ignore ourselves because when we were little kids, perhaps you remember, oh, just suck it up. Just don't, just pretend that you like these people. Don't make a funny face. Just why they're doing it well. Why are you complaining? That's what we've been drummed into us. At least I was when a kid.
Absolutely. We've been programmed that way. And leadership was different a few decades ago. We didn't have the need for the soft skills. So it wasn't as critical, but you're right. Leadership is about having that vision, being able to incorporate it to see actual results, and being able to inspire your team to move forward. These soft skills, I think, are even more important. It's fascinating, George, with AI, who knows where AI is going to ultimately go. There's so many discussions on it right now. But I think what is kind of an agreed upon component of AI is that as things become maybe as certain jobs and certain job requirements are taken over, you're going to need as a leader those soft skills. And so we know that emotional intelligence is going to be really important moving forward as we incorporate AI into what takes place in a company. And so you're right that it starts with us. And Your Intended Message podcast is certainly about that communication. And it's about the communication that our mind, body, and spirit are providing us on a daily basis that helps us become better leaders. So for instance, if you're in the midst of your getting prepared for your earnings call, and it's extremely stressful, and you have to have a communication with someone that is a difficult conversation, that self-awareness aspect of listening to your body say, this may not be the most appropriate time to have that conversation. It's not going to be as productive as if you wait until after getting through the earnings call and then move forward. And so in part, it's becoming aware as a leader as to what is best for you as well. There's a lot of components to it. Of course, one of the biggest ones that I work with individuals on is imposter syndrome, right? And this happens frequently. A majority of leaders in companies have imposter syndrome. And that's a concept of the mind. And, what they teach in wellness and ancient cultures is the mind is a wonderful source. It is wonderful for analytics and to compare and contrast. We absolutely need to work with our mind. It also has a habit of trying to keep us safe and limited. So imposter syndrome is saying, oh, are you sure you're really that good to be able to take on X, Y, or Z? And what I do in working with leaders is help retrain the mind to say everything's okay. We need to help get you out of this moment because it is just a moment. It is also recognizing or being self-aware that the mind is moving in that direction, and then how to bring it back to allow yourself to come back to a state of balance and centeredness to be able to move forward with your leadership. Does that all make sense, George?
Somewhat, Mara. So one of the questions that it raises for me is, are you suggesting that we can't trust our mind?
Not that we can't trust it, but Albert Einstein had, I think, a great quote that he has been often talked of saying, or at least alluding to. And basically it was, what we do here in the United States is we provide all the power to the mind, and we forget that really the gift is our intuition. And that connection that we have to the intuition, the creative, the imaginary aspect. What I would encourage you to think about is saying both of these aspects are important, both the mind as well as being able to have that ability to tap into your intuitive downloads. Fascinatingly, when I work with leaders, they all have them. They just haven't been working and they haven't had a structure for how best to work with them, how to listen to it to be able to best utilize it. So very interesting on that part. And it's a concept of being able to be self-aware of both aspects and come into a place of centeredness to be able to work with it to get the maximum ability and optimize the leadership within the company.
Mara, when you first went to China to study Qigong, was there some aspect of it that totally flipped your understanding of us, our relationship with our body, mind, soul?
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, all these ancient cultures had a way of coming back into, and forgive me, I'm going a little bit more medical at the moment because I work with the GW Center for Integrative Medicine, but we come back to a state of homeostasis, which is our natural place to be. And when we're balanced, when our mind and body and spirit are all in a balanced state, the body is able to optimally heal and be at optimal performance, which helps a leader out. And so again, whether it's yoga or Qigong or any of these approaches, meditation, but it could be also, and this is what I think is really interesting, is for every leader, it's very different as to how they best come back into the state of homeostasis. So for some, it might be going for a run that helps them come back to that state of true balance. When I was in China, to go to your point, what I realized is this concept that has always been there of what we call whole person care, which is we are not separated. Our bodies aren't separated from our mind, aren't separated from our spirit. It's all one and the same. And we get used to, in our healthcare culture right now, we get used to thinking that things are separated out, that one does not impact the other. And that's actually not true. They're all completely part of the whole. So when a doctor says to a patient, this illness is stress related, often that person walks out of the doctor's office and may not know what to do with that. Like, what? So now what do I do? If it's stress related, what does that look like? And what I do, whether the person is, I'm working with them on a health perspective or from a leadership role, it's about helping become more aware of the messages that your mind, body, and spirit are providing you. So for instance, one of the exercises I sometimes do is ask the person to identify 3 of their top stressors. Then we go to a place of, if the person can meditate, if they can't meditate, we do some other things. But if the person's able to meditate, we go into a state of meditation and I have them identify where in the body that first stressor is. And invariably they can determine where it is. And then I ask them, how do you know that to be true? And they'll describe words like tension or pain, or they can come up with lots of words. Now, if you listen to those words, tension, pain, they're actually feeling words. And then we're able to go even deeper as to what this stressor is actually kind of bringing up for them and what the next step is to resolve it. And then we can go to the second stressor, the third stressor, right? We can figure that all out. And, clients that I have are amazed that the body is actually messaging this to them and that it's all connected.
And while you're saying that, I recall my own experience when I had a job that was hell.
Mm-hmm.
And I hated going to work every day, but I did it, one, because I needed to, to support my family. And I was trying to prove something that I could do it. Mm-hmm. And I remember as I would approach, I'd be driving to work, and about a block away, my stomach would start tightening up. It would just start turning into a knot. And as I approach, I had these thoughts. Gee, I hope my boss isn't here today. I hope he doesn't show up because he's a real pain to deal with. And I finally quit that job. One day I just blew up and called some people names. And after that I had to quit, which was the cure. But I was ignoring what my body was telling me. I was trying to take come on, tough it up, George. You can do this. You can show them.
Absolutely. And I bet that knot went away in your stomach. Is that right, George?
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
Yeah. So your body was a team player. We see this in healthcare all the time. We can see some of the connections. We're starting in the healthcare industry. We're starting to move towards whole person care. But it's also a really important technique in leadership as well, because your body is a team player with you. And when I say that to leaders, there's a pause. There's like that ache that I've been having, that pain that I've been having, I didn't think of as the body being a team player with me, but it is. And you can get to optimal performance, mind, body, and spirit, when you work on all these different aspects. And I'm not sure, George, does it make sense what I'm talking about with mind, body, and spirit in all these components?
I believe it does. And it's true from what I've seen. Our medical people, they separate as, okay, you've
Right.
got a ear problem, you got a knee problem, you got a kidney problem. It's got nothing to do with the rest of the body. And again, I remembered when I broke my foot, which healed, but then later I had a neck problem. And it turns out the neck problem was related to the foot because I was walking funny because of the foot. And so one part of the body creates a reaction somewhere else. And I guess and I hear that. So it is a team. Our body is a team. And I suppose if more of us thought of that concept, we'd take better care of ourselves.
Well, take better care of yourself. And I want to reiterate, it really does help you with optimal performance. And I think maybe the best place that you're seeing this play out in real time is like the Olympics with Simone Biles. I mean, and we didn't even talk in that scenario about the mental aspects. And again, it's all connected. So she got what was known as the twisties. And this can happen to leaders all the time, where mental stories that they have. Remember, we have about 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Are those thoughts helping us move past imposter syndrome, giving us confidence, or are we telling stories about our leadership, about what we're doing in the company that is not accurate and not really helping us with our performance? And so Simone Biles did a really amazing thing, probably helping many people understand that when she had what she called the twisties, she took some time out to investigate that. And it did, if you see how she came back from that, she had to begin practice physically over a short period of time because her body wasn't there, because the mind and spirit and the body were all connected. Right. So she wasn't able to come back and start practicing right away. They had her practice 1 hour, take a break, go home. We don't want you to be back in your typical workout schedule because physically your body's not, it's going to go back into the twisties. Right. And while she is more physical, it doesn't matter. As a leader, the same thing happens too. And so mentally, we have to look at what stories our mind is telling us that are not true. And we have to look at how we're communicating, just like your intended message podcast would indicate, right? We have to look at how we're communicating to ourselves. And then the second component is the physical. How's your body? What do you notice that's showing up for you physically? If you're constantly getting a headache, what about your work might be causing that tension, right? So how do we work? When I work with clients, it's about alleviating that tension. So what do we have to do to help you alleviate that headache? And then the third part, which we really haven't spoken about, is spirit. It's about how you get inspired. How are you utilizing your values? How are you showing up authentically? Where is it? What do you believe that helps you to move forward? So another example of this, just to kind of bring this full circle then, is, for instance, Steve Jobs, who was really well known. He went away and meditated, connected the mind, body, and spirit. He would receive his next download. I call them downloads. It's that intuitive download that you get. And he knew then how to move forward with his company in the next iteration of what was taking place. And as we start to see these shifts with AI and other things, companies are going to need to spend more time having their leaders be more creative. That's going to be important for the next iterations that they will be doing. And in part, this self-awareness, ability to self-regulate, to be able to tap in to the mind-body-spirit connection will be beneficial to those leaders being able to have the vision they want. And then when you're really tapped in and you can feel things, you connect better one-on-one with your team to be able to understand what might be taking place with them and to be able to communicate really well with that too. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, and what I'm hearing there, you mentioned earlier about the role of the mind is to create limits and keep us safe. And now you mentioned the importance of being creative. And typically being creative means moving into new territory, which means going past limits and perhaps becoming unsafe. And so in order to become creative, it sounds like we need to have better connection within our body, mind, and soul.
Yeah. So more specifically on that, you can use different words. And so whatever word feels right for you, whenever you're tapping into your creative side, that is more in tune with your intuition and how you're getting your intuitive downloads, right? So when Steve Jobs went away and meditated, it was not his mind. It wasn't the earnings calls that were helping him to create. Instead, what was happening was he was balancing his body to be able to tap into his creative side to figure out what would happen next within the company. So for me, that's intuition. And if I can take it further, hopefully I can explain this without a graphic. Here's what happens physically with both those scenarios. You have your autonomic nervous system. Do you remember that from when we were in junior high or high school? And so you have your sympathetic, which is your fight or flight response. And that's very much needed. It's to make sure you get your get up and go, right? You are able to wake up in the morning and spring out of bed and go do what you want to do. Very important. It also keeps us safe as well. It's watching out for that proverbial lion to jump out at us. So that is the sympathetic side, the fight or flight. The other side to that, which we might remember, is the parasympathetic side, known as the rest and digest. So if you're having sleeping problems, you're not in your parasympathetic side enough. If you're having irritable bowel syndrome, this is a little, generic, but if you're having stomach issues, it also may be an issue with your parasympathetic side. Your parasympathetic side allows you to just come in, relax, stay centered for a moment. And you need both aspects within your body to have what we call homeostasis. Likewise, so if we have those two components, the other two components to that is your mind is connected to the fight or flight response, right? So it's keeping you safe and sound, but it's analyzing, it's comparing, it's contrasting, it's data collecting, which is very important, and we need it. And on the parasympathetic side is that connection to your creative, your intuitive, however you wish to think about that. And so when those are all balanced is when you're at optimal performance for work as well.
And how important is it for us to be aware of the need to take a break, and especially when things need to get done? And what? You're taking a break? Come on, we got to get this done.
So I love you telling me this. So thank you, George. So a big component of this, and see if this relates for you too, right, is the majority of people in the United States are over on the side that is the sympathetic and the mind, right? So we're in overdrive for the most part on this side of the equation. And so much so that many of the leaders I work with do not know even how to begin to get over to the parasympathetic side. So they may not be able to meditate or whatever it might be, right? So what I say, and this is one of the things I hear quite frequently, Maura, I get up and I run for a half an hour. I think that should be able to get me out of my fight or flight. Or I get up and I meditate for half an hour. Why is it then the rest of the day I get kind of anxious or, feel like I'm revved up? And the question becomes, if there's 24 hours in a day and you're only spending a half an hour over here in your parasympathetic side, that's not going to really help you get to a state of homeostasis. And that's when chronic stress occurs because you're over here way too much. So what I do is I encourage my clients to adopt very simple techniques throughout the day to help get themselves slowly rebalanced from the sympathetic, to the parasympathetic side. So it's about incorporating small techniques that you can do throughout the day to help start making that transition, and so that your body gets comfortable with it. Because also, if you've been over in the sympathetic for too long, then whenever you start to go over the parasympathetic, your body's like, oh no, we can't do that. We don't have time. We have too much to get done, all of that. And then finally, George, and I'm really curious to see if you've ever had this happen, is when I get leaders moving over to the parasympathetic side, then I start to do, okay, now you're in the parasympathetic side. Think of a problem you have. And we go through an exercise and they get quick answers, very quick answers, because they're no longer in the fight or flight response. They're actually in a state of calmness. And so that thought process can help them get clarity on the problems that they have. Have you ever had that or experienced it?
That suddenly I'm calm and I've got answers.
Yeah. Maybe you go for a run, for instance, and
I
then
do. I go for a run in the morning.
Okay.
Actually, I run 3 days and I walk 3 days.
Okay.
And as you were talking there, I thought, well, that should be enough, right?
Yeah.
I'm getting my exercise. I'm getting outside. I'm breathing. I'm clearing my mind at that time. I don't listen to music or podcasts. I talk to myself.
Okay. And so do you have clarity when you come back from your run sometimes?
I believe so. Yeah. I try to set my goals for the day, my expectations. I try to calm myself. One of the questions that I ask myself is, okay, what am I thankful for today? Because I believe that makes one appreciate something and see a good of even something bad. Like I've even at one point, I even said that I was thankful for that terrible job I had because I survived and because I learned not to put myself in a situation like that again.
Mm-hmm. It's really helpful from a leadership perspective, right? To look and analyze what took place and to understand what lessons were learned from that. Yeah, that's significant. So congratulations. That actually brings up another point, which is our life patterns that we have within us as leaders, right? And so invariably, when we start working on coming to that place of centeredness, we see some of these life patterns that the person has, not right, not wrong, just as we evolve as leaders, we need to be aware of. Those life patterns that are showing up personally are usually also showing up as for them as a leader. So for instance, if they try to avoid conflict at home, most likely they're avoiding conflict within the company as well. And so in part, it's about helping them when they're able to get to a state of balance and clarity to be able to see how they can work through those life patterns as well to become better leaders overall. And so that's often what comes up as we continue on. Like there's advanced courses to all of this as you begin to understand the basics and incorporate it into your leadership techniques too.
Before a leader going into a tense meeting, perhaps there's some sort of conflict, either with a customer, a supplier, or a key member of their staff. What can that leader do in those few moments, because they've got meetings back to back? What can they do in those few minutes to moments to get in the right state of body, mind, and soul?
Yeah. Again, just like your intended message podcast talks about listening and being aware of communication techniques, right? The same is true here as well. So what I find with leaders is everyone is a little different about how they connect over to their parasympathetic side. And we have to develop unique tools for them as to what works best. The reason I say this, right, is one of the things I can definitely say is, if you only have 2 seconds, take a few deep breaths in, connect in with your breath. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. For a leader who is on the go all the time and in fight or flight, telling someone to breathe doesn't necessarily work, right? It's like when your mind has gone off on a story and it's already left the train station, for me to sit down and tell you, okay, I need you now to breathe, that's not going to work. So sometimes what we have to do when our mind goes off and is running down a trail of everything that's taking place is just from a place of awareness, watch the mind run. Just become aware. Oh, my mind is trying to keep me safe and secure. It's decided to run off on this story, and I'm just watching it go. And I'm going to let it run for about 10 minutes. I'm just going to watch the clock. I'm just going to let it go and then see if you can bring it back. So this process of coming into the parasympathetic side and your creativity is a process. We have to really work on it. For that leader about to walk into a meeting, I might encourage them to do physical movements to get and release that tension that's being held within the body. For someone else, if I've taught them some different breathing techniques, I might say to them, what I want you to do is just really connect into the breath. But for each leader, it's a little individualized depending on how it is that they're able to connect over their parasympathetic, right? So George, for you, for instance, you're a great runner. I would really be saying to you as an example, George, I want you the next time you go for a run to think about a problem that you have, do that run. At the end of the run, I want you to just sit down in a place of nature that you really love, think of the problem, and then just allow yourself to breathe in and out and see what comes for clarity for you and see what happens. And George, I'm going to be really curious as to what happens with that if you choose to do it. There are other techniques that we can include if you don't get a quick message, but usually people get clarity. And the one thing is, if you don't get clarity, the question you can ask is, just provide me the next step of what to do. And almost invariably, people get that next step.
I will try that. And I've already, near the end of my run, there's a park bench that I can use, and there's trees around there. So
yeah, when I train medical students at GW, we went through self-care. We talked about communications, listening to the mind, body, and spirit. The number one thing almost invariably the doctors would say is they are able to tap into their parasympathetic by being out in nature. So usually people enjoy being out in nature. So that's another component, is take 15 minutes to allow yourself to be out in nature and to see if you can get some clarity by just enjoying kind of what the Japanese call forest bathing, or being out in nature and being able to tap into that as well.
I know one CEO who I certainly admire. He often has his meetings are a walk in nature. When I went to meet with him, we jumped into his car. He just drove down the road a little bit when we found this nature area, and there was a marsh there and trees. And so we walked for about 30 minutes and talked, and here we are in nature. We're having a business meeting in nature. And it was calming, and we enjoyed each other's company.
Yeah, he may not have known that what he was doing was helping himself get over to the parasympathetic side. It may not have come through as that, but he definitely understood the importance of being able to get the clarity that he needed as a leader, which is incredible. That's awesome that he was doing that.
Mara, you've made a wonderful offer to listeners to have up to 30 minutes consultation with you at no charge. Mm-hmm. Who will get the most out of that, and what mindset or question should they approach that meeting with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you, George. In essence, what I do is work with leaders from corporations and nonprofits. So both are fine, since I have a background with that too. And I find that if this podcast resonated with you, if it was like, oh my gosh, that is what I've been looking for, then you're the right person for me. Because I am incorporating, I certainly do leadership development. I do things such as helping you with your 360, helping you with managing up, managing down, all of those aspects. And I have something called Leadership Excel, which is a program that's for that. But I really find that this aspect of incorporating the wellness into your leadership for optimal performance is also very critical. So certainly if this podcast has got you interested even further, then you're the right candidate for that complimentary consult. And what I'd be open to is, what about our conversation on your intended message podcast today? What was it that really resonated with you? And that will really help us out on the complimentary consult.
And for those who want to contact Mara, you can find the link in the description below. That is at please
True
tell
North.
us.
Yep, sure. Happy. www.truenorthexecutivecoaching.com. It's all about aligning for your success. So yes.
Mara, as we prepare to close, if there's a leader who's preparing to have another tough and busy day, they haven't had the benefit of working with you yet, they haven't gone to China to study Qigong, if you could give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice to start the day and perhaps refresh throughout the day, what might be that advice?
Yeah, I would definitely think about nature, and the opportunity to get out in nature, even if it's for 5 minutes, is always very beneficial. The other thing I would encourage you, as I mentioned, is the parasympathetic side is very unique to each individual. So I'd encourage you to think about, when is it that I lose track of time? When is it that I seem to just be able to not have my mind racing? What am I doing? For some people, it's reading a book. For some people, it's, like I said, something physical. For others, it might be that meditation. And what you want to do is start making a list of what those things are that are really beneficial from a parasympathetic side. And with that, incorporate little techniques throughout the day. So tiny things that you can do. If you're really physical, go for a walk before you have that tough conversation with one of your staffers, right? So do things from a self-awareness perspective as a leader that you can incorporate some of this parasympathetic side components to be able to make yourself a better leader overall.
Powerful advice. My guest today is Mara Benner, reminding you that your body is a team player. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.